The lab was a lot like a nightclub, if you swapped the synth beats and cheap booze for the hum of high-tech machinery and the acrid stench of burned circuits. Dr. Vexley stood in the middle of it all, squinting at a holographic display that flickered like it was powered by optimism alone. "Well, isn't this just the cherry on top of today's shit sundae?" she muttered. The screen displayed a distress signal, a cacophony of garbled noises that was somehow worse than the latest pop hit playing on repeat in the canteen. "What's the problem now, Vex?" asked Rin, her assistant, who had the perpetual look of someone who just found out their favorite show was cancelled. "More space static? Worse," Vexley replied, poking at the display like it owed her money. "We've got a signal here that suggests some extraterrestrial assholes are playing Dr. Moreau with our DNA." Rin blinked, processing that. "So, they're what, trying to turn us into their loyal poodles? Yeah, seems these aliens think we'd make great pets. Although, if they're expecting us to roll over and fetch, they've got another thing coming." Vexley sighed. "I can barely get you to fetch coffee." "Well, it's not in my job description," Rin shot back, grinning. "And seriously, who'd want humans as pets? We're barely house-trained." Vexley chuckled darkly. "Tell me about it, but it seems someone out there thinks we're the next best thing in cosmic cat toys." She turned back to the display, watching as the signal morphed into a 3D rendering of human DNA, twisted and warped like it had gone through a space blender. "We need to figure out where this is coming from, and fast. Before they start sending us leashes and flea collars." Rin leaned over, peering at the screen. "So, what's the plan? Play the good old game of space detective and track down the source?" "That's the spirit," Vexley said, sarcasm thick in her voice. "We'll need to decode this mess first. Get the team together. It's time to do that thing we're good at, pretending we know what the hell we're doing." A few hours later, the lab was buzzing with more activity than a hornet's nest in a rock concert. Screens lit up the dim room, casting an eerie glow on faces that were a study in concentration or constipation, depending on how hopeless they felt. "All right, folks," Vexley called out, clapping her hands once. "We've got a situation that's more complicated than my last tax return. Let's make it happen." One of the techs, a lanky guy named Jax who looked like he'd been pulled out of the Matrix on a bad day, spoke up. "So, we're really dealing with aliens turning people into pets? I thought that was just a bad sci-fi flick." "Welcome to reality," Vexley replied, pointing at the data streaming across the monitors. "Except here, we don't get a budget for special effects. This is as real as it gets." "Great," Jax said, scratching his head. "Just what I needed, another reason to never leave the planet." "Cheer up, Jax," Rin quipped. "Think of it this way. If we screw this up, you won't have to worry about off-world vacations. You'll be too busy chasing sticks in someone's alien backyard." "Comforting," Jax grumbled, turning back to his terminal. Hours passed as the team dug through the data like archaeologists sifting through sand for ancient secrets. The lab was filled with the ambient noise of clattering keyboards and the occasional colorful curse. "I think I've got something," said Saria, the team's resident codebreaker, her voice tinged with the kind of excitement that suggested she might have found the last piece of cake in the fridge. "Hit me," Vexley said, leaning over her shoulder. Saria tapped a few keys, and the signal separated, revealing a series of coordinates. "There, traced it back to this sector." Vexley stared at the display, a frown creasing her forehead. "Well, that's just peachy. Smack dab in the middle of nowhere. Isn't it always the case?" Rin remarked. "If it's not in the ass end of the galaxy, it's not worth looking at." The team gathered around the screen, murmuring amongst themselves like spectators at a particularly grim sporting event. "What do we do now?" Jax asked, his voice almost lost in the hubbub. Vexley straightened, her expression turning serious. "We gear up for a little field trip, my friends. Time to see what these interstellar dog trainers are really up to." Rin groaned. "Great, I love surprises. Especially the kind that might end with us being housebroken." "Don't worry," Vexley said, patting his shoulder. "Think of it as a chance to meet new people, see new places, and possibly not get turned into someone's favorite pet." The mood in the lab shifted, a mix of apprehension and grim determination settling over the team. They knew what they were about to face was dangerous, possibly more than anything they'd encountered before. "All right, let's get moving," Vexley commanded. "Rin, prep the shuttle. Jax, make sure our equipment is ready to go. Saria, Keep working on the signal. I want to know everything about these bastards before we step foot in their neck of the cosmic woods. The team dispersed, the room a flurry of activity. Vexley watched them go, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. This is either going to be the biggest breakthrough since we cracked the genome, she murmured, or the biggest screw-up since they decided to put pineapple on pizza. Hours later, the shuttle was prepped, gleaming ominously on the launch pad like a chrome coffin. Vexley stood by the open hatch, her expression a mix of resolve and resignation. Last chance to back out, she said to Rin, who was checking the systems one final time. Nah, he replied with a wry smile. I'd hate to miss seeing you try and negotiate our release with some squishy overlords. You know me too well, Vexley retorted, climbing into the shuttle. Let's just hope they have a sense of humor. And if they don't? Rin asked, strapping in beside her. Vexley grinned, her eyes gleaming with dark mirth. Then I guess we'll just have to teach them one. The shuttle's engines roared to life, a deafening crescendo that rattled teeth and bones alike. The team was silent, the reality of their mission settling over them like a suffocating blanket. As they rocketed into the void, the earth shrinking behind them, Vexley couldn't shake the feeling that they were hurtling towards something far worse than they could ever imagine. But then again, in a universe where humans could end up as cosmic pets, what was imagination but a limp consolation prize? So, Rin said over the intercom, his voice laced with sarcasm. What do you think, Vex? Think they'll have treats waiting for us? Vexley chuckled despite herself. Let's just hope they're house-trained. The laughter was cut short by the sudden violent lurch of the ship, the kind that suggested something had gone very, very wrong. What the hell was that? Jax shouted from the back, his voice a blend of panic and annoyance. Looks like we've got a welcoming committee, Vexley replied, checking the sensors. Buckle up, folks. Seems like these aliens don't like uninvited guests. The ship shuddered under a barrage of unknown energy, lights flashing warning signs that would make even the most seasoned pilot sweat. The team gripped their seats, the dark humor of the situation rapidly losing its charm. As they hurtled towards the coordinates, the reality of their mission became all too clear. They were the last line of defense against becoming the universe's next designer pets. And in a galaxy where the unexpected was the norm, the stakes had never been higher. Just remember, Vexley called out over the chaos, whatever happens, it's been a hell of a ride. The shuttle plunged into the unknown, leaving behind nothing but a trail of dust and the frantic echoes of laughter and fear. For Dr. Vexley and her team, the adventure had only just begun, and the line between predator and prey was about to blur in ways they'd never anticipated. The shuttle rattled like a death trap on wheels, except there were no wheels, and the whole thing was supposed to be death-proof. Vexley had her doubts. Rin, give me a reading, she snapped, clutching the edge of her seat like it might save her life. Or at least save her from having to float in space like some tragic balloon animal. Sure thing, Vex, Rin replied, flicking switches like he was playing a tune on a particularly inefficient piano. It appears we're heading into a sector of space specifically designed to ruin our day. Sensors are picking up a lot of chatter. Looks like the Xyler have rolled out the welcome mat. Xyler? Jax chimed in from the back, his voice high-pitched with the kind of fear usually reserved for tax audits or dentist appointments. Isn't that the alien species that likes to play God with other species' DNA? The very ones, Vexley confirmed, her tone as dry as a Martian summer. And it seems they've taken a particular shine to us. Maybe they're fans of human resilience. Or maybe they just think we're the galaxy's favorite science project. Well, Rin added, if they're planning to come over and introduce themselves, they could at least bring a casserole or something. Vexley rolled her eyes, trying to push down the unease bubbling in her gut like a bad curry. Saria, how's that signal scrubbing going? Saria's fingers danced over the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of the holographic display as she decoded the alien signal. Got bad news and worse news. Looks like the Xyler are running some kind of countdown. If my math's right, and it always is, we've got roughly 72 hours before whatever it is they're planning goes live. So, a ticking time bomb then, Jax muttered, running a hand through his hair, which only made it stand out at odder angles. Because why not add a little dramatic tension to our lives? The team collectively groaned. A countdown added a lovely sense of urgency to their already delightful predicament. Fantastic, Vexley sighed, rubbing her temples. So, not only are we dealing with aliens who see us as their next pet upgrade, but we've also got a deadline. Someone remind me why we even bothered getting out of bed this morning. Because sleep is overrated? Rin offered helpfully. And because we're the unfortunate idiots tasked with saving humanity, Saria added. Also, because coffee exists. Right, Vexley said, mustering what little resolve she had left. Let's keep our heads. First, we need a proper understanding of these Xylar. What do we know? Rin tapped a few keys, bringing up fragmented data on the Xylar. The screen filled with images of creatures that looked like someone had taken a jellyfish, slapped it together with a squid, and then added a few extra limbs for good measure. According to the archives, the Xylar are notorious for bioengineering. They've done it to countless species before. Their advantage? They're masters at genetic manipulation. So, they're essentially the universe's answer to a mad scientist with way too much free time, Jax said, frowning at the screen. Pretty much, Rin agreed. And now they've set their sights on us. Lucky us. Any idea why? Vexley asked, already knowing the answer would likely make her want to bang her head against the nearest wall. It seems they're fascinated by our adaptability, Saria explained, her eyes never leaving the display. They think they can improve it, make us into something more useful. Useful? As what? Galactic dishwashers? Jax snorted. Try shock troops, Saria corrected, her face grim. The data suggests they're looking to bolster their ranks. And we, in their twisted little eyes, make the perfect candidates. Wonderful, Vexley muttered, feeling more than a little queasy. So, we're not just pets. We're cannon fodder. Rin turned to Vexley, the sarcasm gone from his voice. What's the play, Vex? We can't exactly hold a protest rally in space. No, we can't, Vexley agreed, grimacing. But we can disrupt their plans. If we can find the source of this signal, we might be able to disable whatever it is they're planning to unleash. That's a lot of ifs, Jax pointed out, his tone suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else than on this doomed mission. Welcome to life, Vexley shot back. Nothing's ever simple, and if it is, you're probably missing something important. A heavy silence settled over the shuttle, each team member lost in their own thoughts, contemplating the absurdity of their situation. They were in way over their heads, but then, that was nothing new. So, Rin said, breaking the silence, the coordinates point to a derelict station somewhere in the asteroid belt of this sector. I'm guessing that's where they're transmitting from. Then that's where we're going, Vexley declared, her voice brooking no argument. Buckle up, team. We're about to crash a party, and I've got a feeling the hosts aren't going to be thrilled to see us. Story of our lives, Jax said, shaking his head. Remind me to update my will before our next mission. Assuming we have a next mission, Rin added, twisting the throttle to guide the shuttle toward the asteroid belt. I swear, if we survive this, I'm taking a vacation. Somewhere far, far away from anything remotely resembling a spaceship. Plan a vacation later, Vexley interrupted, preferably after we've made sure we're not about to become the latest addition to the Xylar's genetic zoo. As they navigated through the asteroid field, the team kept their eyes peeled for the derelict station. It loomed ahead like a ghost ship, its silhouette stark against the backdrop of twinkling stars. The station was a relic of a bygone era, its once formidable structure now a skeletal ruin, floating aimlessly in the void. Looks like we found it, Saria noted, her voice barely above a whisper as they approached. Yeah, and it looks like the kind of place where horror movies start, Jax muttered, clearly unimpressed by the ominous sight. Let's hope it doesn't end like one, Vexley replied, focusing on the task at hand. Rin, bring us in nice and easy. I'd rather not add crash landing to today's list of failures. Got it, Rin confirmed, guiding the shuttle into a docking position with all the finesse of a seasoned pilot, or at least one who hadn't been drinking heavily before takeoff. As the shuttle latched onto the station's dilapidated airlock, the team prepared themselves for whatever awaited them inside. Vexley took a deep breath, steeling herself against the uncertainty of their mission. Everyone ready? She asked, her gaze sweeping over her team. As ready as I'll ever be to walk into an alien death trap, Jax said with a resigned shrug. Let's just hope the Xylar aren't keen on jump scares, Saria added, gripping her weapon with a white-knuckled grip. Or on dissecting us, Rin quipped, his attempt at levity falling flat in the oppressive silence. Let's move, Vexley ordered, leading the way into the airlock. As they entered the station, the atmosphere shifted, the temperature dropping as they moved through the narrow corridors, their footfalls echoing ominously. "It's like a haunted house in space," Jax whispered, his voice loud in the stifling quiet. "Too bad we didn't bring any ghost-busting gear," Rin replied, scanning the dimly lit passageways for signs of life. "Focus, people," Vexley hissed, unwilling to let their nerves get the better of them. "We need to find the source of the signal and shut it down before the Xyler decide to pay us a personal visit." As they ventured deeper into the station, the tension grew palpable, the sense of impending doom hanging over them like a storm cloud. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every creak of metal a potential harbinger of disaster. "Over there," Saria called, pointing to a control room at the end of the corridor. The door was ajar, flickering lights spilling out like a beacon guiding them forward. "Looks promising," Vexley said, her voice tight with determination. "Let's get this over with." Cautiously, they entered the control room, the air thick with the smell of stale ozone and neglect. The source of the transmission was immediately apparent, a pulsating console in the center of the room, wires and cables snaking across the floor like a mechanical octopus. "Well, this looks friendly," Jax commented, eyeing the setup with a healthy dose of skepticism. "Let's hope it's as easy to shut down as it looks," Rin added, moving toward the console. "I'd hate to think we came all this way for nothing." "Careful," Vexley warned, her gaze fixed on the console. "If the Xyler are as tech-savvy as we think, this thing might be booby-trapped." "Wouldn't be the first time someone tried to blow us up," Saria said, her fingers poised over the controls, ready to work her magic. "Or the last," Jax muttered, standing guard by the door. "I'll keep watch, just in case our hosts decide to drop by." With a nod from Vexley, Saria got to work, her fingers flying over the console with practiced precision. The rest of the team watched anxiously, the seconds ticking by with agonizing slowness. "Got it," Saria announced suddenly, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Signals disabled." Before Vexley could voice her relief, the station shuddered violently, throwing them off balance. Red lights flared, alarms blaring with ear-splitting intensity. "What the hell?" Rin exclaimed, grabbing onto the console for support. "Looks like the Xyler weren't keen on us interfering," Jax shouted above the din. "We've got company." Vexley's heart raced as she realized the gravity of their situation. They were trapped in the belly of the beast, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. "Back to the shuttle," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Move." As they raced through the station, the walls groaned ominously, the Xyler's wrath bearing down on them like the icy grip of inevitability. "Next time, can we pick a mission that doesn't involve imminent death?" Jax called out, his words echoing off the metal walls. "No promises," Vexley replied, adrenaline fueling her steps as they neared the airlock. "But if we make it out of here, drinks are on me." "Noted," Rin shouted, ushering Saria through the airlock before following suit. With the Xyler hot on their heels, the team piled into the shuttle, the hatch slamming shut with a satisfying thud. Vexley leapt into the pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the controls as she initiated the launch sequence. Come on," she muttered, willing the engines to roar to life. As the shuttle broke free of the station, the team let out a collective sigh of relief, the adrenaline high slowly ebbing away. "Well, that was fun," Rin quipped, his voice laced with exhaustion. "Let's not do it again anytime soon." "Agreed," Vexley said, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen as they left the station, and the Xyler, behind. "Next time, let's pick a mission that doesn't involve death-defying stunts." "Or alien overlords," Jax added, slumping back in his seat. "Or countdowns to destruction," Saria chimed in, a tired smile playing on her lips. "Or all of the above," Rin concluded, closing his eyes with a weary chuckle. As the shuttle sped toward safety, Vexley allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. They'd thwarted the Xyler's plans, for now. But in a universe where chaos reigned supreme, she knew their next challenge was always just around the corner. "Onward to the next disaster," she murmured, a wry smile tugging at her lips. In space, it seemed, there was no rest for the wicked, or the irreverent. Vexley slammed the shuttle's control panel with the zeal of someone who had just narrowly avoided becoming an exotic pet or an experimental subject. Her fingers danced over the buttons like a concert pianist at their most frantic, though her symphony was a series of beeps and bleeps, not exactly classical music to anyone's ears. Right, she announced, injecting a dollop of determination into her voice. We've shut down their signal, but that's just a start. We need a plan to make sure the Xyler can't just flick a switch and start up again. Rin leaned back in his seat, feet casually propped up on the console as if he were settling in for a leisurely chat over drinks rather than facing down a formidable alien species. So, any ideas that don't involve us getting vaporized or mutated beyond recognition? Not that I'm against a little adventure, but my preference is to keep all my limbs intact. Yeah, my last metamorphosis didn't exactly endear me to the ladies, Jax chimed in, fiddling with the strap of his seatbelt as if it could somehow ward off impending doom. Vexley ignored the banter, her mind racing. Saria, how are we doing on resources? Any chance we've got enough tech on this flying piece of scrap to come up with a countermeasure? Saria shrugged, her expression a mix of confidence and skepticism. Well, we've got a few toys in the box. Whether they're useful or not is another question entirely. But I've got a few ideas. That's the spirit, Vexley said with a perky sarcasm, punching up the shuttle's inventory on the display. We've got 72 hours to brainstorm or improvise something that'll send the Xyler packing. Maybe mix a bit of human ingenuity with their tech. See what happens if we put a few Xyler circuits in a blender with the crap we've got lying around. Great, Rin said, an eyebrow arched. Because science is just fancy cooking, right? Add a dash of alien tech, stir vigorously, and hope you don't blow up the kitchen. Jax looked over, one eye squinting skeptically. And what happens when the Xyler come knocking again? Do we greet them with a pie in the face and a side of explosive devices? If only it were that simple, Vexley replied, scanning the equipment list. But we're going to have to improvise. Think outside the box. Hell, think outside the galaxy if we have to. Saria tapped a knuckle against her chin, engrossed in her thoughts. I might be able to jury-rig something using their own frequency. Scramble it, make it sound like gibberish. If the Xyler's tech relies on precision, we muddy the waters, they might not be able to reactivate without a lot of elbow grease. Or tentacle grease, whatever they use, Rin quipped, arms crossed as he considered the plan. Jax snorted, I just hope it's not flammable. Vexley shot him a look. If it is, you'll be the first to find out. Now, let's get to work. I'll take the console and see if we can't figure out a way to reverse engineer their tech. Saria, that scrambling doohickey of yours needs prototyping. Rin, you're on lookout. Keep us from being blown to stardust. Jax, you stand here and look nervous? Jax finished, eyes wide with faux enthusiasm. Exactly, Vexley confirmed. No one makes mild panic look as good as you do. The team fell into a rhythm of calculated chaos, each person working their niche. The shuttle was a hive of activity punctuated by the occasional sarcastic quip or grim chuckle. It was all very human, in its dysfunctional glory. Hey, Vex, Rin called after a few hours, peering through the sensors. Got some movement on the edge of the sector. Might be a Xyler recon drone. Or a misplaced asteroid with a grudge. Vexley didn't look up from the console, her focus split between her work and the increasingly dire situation. Either way, let's not make friends. See if you can reroute our signal through that debris field. Might throw them off our scent. Rin tapped a few keys, his expression one of mild indifference. Done and done. If they figure out where we are, I'll eat my own boot. Seasoned or raw? Jax asked, peeking over Saria's shoulder. Depends. Got any alien spices? Saria ignored the chatter, her own fingers busy with the delicate circuitry of the alien tech. I think I've got something. If I can just, there. The machine hummed differently, a low, vibrating whine that seemed to resonate through the deck. What was that? Vexley glanced over, pausing in her work. Just a little twist on their frequency. If I'm right, and I usually am, this should send any incoming signals into a feedback loop. With any luck, we'll be the static in their heads. Rin looked impressed. Not bad for a day's work. Think it'll hold? If it doesn't, we'll know soon enough, Saria replied, exuding confidence that bolstered the team's morale. They continued their work, the hours ticking by with an agonizing slowness that could only be matched by the growing tension. The Xyler were out there, lurking, waiting for a slip-up that would lead them straight to the team. Hey, boss, Rin called again, the earlier levity replaced by a harder edge. Drones are getting closer. Either they've got a scent or they're just plain lucky. Then let's make them unlucky, Vexley snapped, her focus razor sharp. Jax, see if you can't rig something explosive to keep them busy if they get too close. Nothing says, stay away, like a well-timed bang. One homemade bomb, coming right up, Jax replied, his voice tinged with reluctant enthusiasm. Hope they enjoy surprises. The team worked like a well-oiled machine, despite the impending threat. Every beep from the console, every hum from Saria's device ratcheted up the tension another notch. How's it looking, Vex? Saria asked after a tense silence, her eyes locked on her own readouts. Like we're building a sandcastle in a hurricane, Vexley replied dryly. But it's the best damn castle we've got. Rin kept an eye on the scanner readouts, his voice dropping a notch in seriousness. They're closing in. We've got maybe 30 minutes before they're on top of us. Then let's make those 30 minutes count, Vexley said, rolling up her sleeves as if preparing to dive into a particularly stubborn piece of alien tech. As they worked, the air grew heavy with anticipation, every second a tick closer to potential disaster. The thought of having to face the Xyler head-on made Vexley's stomach churn, but she'd be damned if she let them win without a fight. Jax, how are those explosives coming along? Vexley asked, glancing at him over her shoulder. Ready to go boom at a moment's notice, Jax replied, a hint of pride in his voice. Just say the word. Good. Saria, are we ready to test your frequency jammer? I'd say it's as ready as it'll ever be, Saria said, a gleam of determination in her eyes. Let's hope it scrambles more than their breakfast. All right, Vexley said, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Everyone to their stations. Let's see if we can't make the Xyler regret picking a fight with us. With a renewed sense of purpose, the team prepared for the confrontation, each member taking their place in the cramped shuttle. Vexley felt a strange sense of camaraderie with her crew, a shared resolve that seemed to fill the small space with an almost tangible energy. 20 minutes, Rin announced, his voice carrying an edge of urgency. Then let's give them a show, Vexley said, her fingers flying over the controls as she activated Saria's device. The shuttle thrummed with a low hum, the jammer coming to life with a pulse of energy. Hope they like their signals shaken, not stirred, Saria said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with a grim determination that matched Vexley's own. As the seconds ticked down, the tension in the shuttle grew almost palpable, a living thing that coiled around each of them like a snake ready to strike. They were on the precipice of disaster, but Vexley felt a strange calm settle over her, a clarity that cut through the chaos like a knife. 5 minutes, Rin said, his voice tight. Everyone ready? Vexley asked, her gaze sweeping over her team, each face a mixture of fear and resolve. Ready, they replied in unison, their voices carrying the weight of their shared determination. Then let's show these Xyler bastards what it means to mess with humans, Vexley said, her voice filled with a fierce, defiant pride. As the Xyler drones closed in, the team braced themselves, ready to face whatever came next with a grim determination that burned in their eyes. They might be outnumbered, outmatched, and facing impossible odds, but they were human, and that meant they were never truly beaten until they stopped fighting. And fight they would, with every ounce of courage, every scrap of resourcefulness, and every ounce of sheer bloody-mindedness they possessed. Because sometimes, in the darkest of times, it was the human spirit, and a healthy dose of stubbornness, that made all the difference. The shuttle hummed with the low, angry vibration of a hornet's nest about to be kicked. Vexley paced, her mind racing through a maze of potential disasters. She'd always considered herself a pessimist, glass half empty, preferably with whiskey, but today, she was discovering new depths of gloom. If they didn't pull this off, the Xyler would turn them into cosmic confetti. Rin, stretched out in the co-pilot's seat, was watching the screens as if they'd suddenly start streaming a comedy show. You know, if this wasn't a life-or-death situation, the suspense might actually be exciting, he quipped, kicking his feet up on the console. Exciting? Try infuriating, Saria shot back, her fingers a blur over the alien tech. If I mess this up, you'll be the one telling all our clones where we went wrong. Do you think they'll make us smarter next time? Jax chimed in, plopping down nearby. Maybe throw in some extra muscles? I could do with a 6-pack. You'd probably still find a way to screw it up, Vexley muttered, sifting through the endless lines of code on her screen. Her patience was wearing thinner than the atmosphere on Mars. Amidst the tension, a sudden flicker on the main console pulled Vexley's attention. An alert flashed. A second of hesitation that might as well have been a lifetime. Someone had tampered with the sensors, creating a false trail. Someone inside. Stop everything. Vexley barked, silencing the chatter in an instant. We've got saboteur juice on the sensors. Sabotage? You mean someone's been fiddling with our toys? Rin asked, leaning forward with a frown. Seems like it, Vexley replied, her voice grim. That's why the Xyler know so damn much about us. Someone's been feeding them our coordinates like it's a bloody buffet. Fantastic, Jax said, throwing his hands up. First aliens, now traitors. What's next? Mutant space chickens? If you see any, keep them away from the lunchbox, Saria said, her expression darkening. All right, Vex, what's the plan? We've got a mole, and only 72 hours to squash it. First, we seal off this part of the shuttle, Vexley decided, hitting several buttons that locked down their section with a resounding thunk. If they're hiding here, they're not going anywhere. Okay, Rin said, standing and looking cautiously around. So we've got a Judas among us. Anyone got a magnifying glass? Lovely thought, Sherlock, Saria said, rolling her eyes. But how do we flush them out? Ask everyone to raise their hands if they've been chatting with the Xyler? Hey, maybe we just offer them a better deal? Jax suggested with a chuckle. You know, promise them free snacks for life if they fess up. Not helping, Jax, Vexley said, though the hint of a smile tugged at her lips. She tapped a few keys, accessing the shuttle's logs. We need to find out who accessed the systems and when. Rin leaned in, peering over her shoulder. Can we trust the logs? Not like they're infallible, especially if someone's been mucking around in them. Good point, Vexley replied, her fingers moving faster now. But it's a start. At the very least, we can see if there's any pattern. The logs scrolled by, a cascade of data that blurred into a confusing mess of numbers and timestamps. But there, hidden among the clutter, was what they needed, an unusual access attempt. Got it, Vexley said, pointing at the line of code that practically screamed, red flag. Someone accessed the system during the night shift. Not on any of our schedules. Night shift? That's when Jax was supposed to be on duty, Saria pointed out, narrowing her eyes. Hey, hold on. Jax protested, hands raised defensively. I was on duty, just not totally awake. I might have dozed a little. But that's because someone, he shot a look at Rin, swapped the coffee with decaf. Decaf? In a crisis? Saria shook her head. That's traitorous behavior in itself. As much as I'd love to play defense attorney, Rin said, how about we focus on who actually accessed the system? Vexley's fingers flew over the keyboard, refining the search. We need to cross-reference this with our logs. See who else could have slipped in when Jax was playing Sleeping Beauty. Gotcha, Saria said, accessing the personnel logs. Looks like everyone else was accounted for, except for one auxiliary engineer on the maintenance shift. Arlo, Vexley muttered, recognition lighting a fire in her eyes. Damn it, I thought he was weirdly enthusiastic about his job. Enthusiastic? More like too fond of late-night strolls through restricted areas, Rin observed. Guess we found our mole, Jax said, his tone a mix of relief and annoyance. What do we do? Invite him for a little chat? Vexley considered, her mind whirling through their options. We need to confront him, but carefully. If he knows we're onto him, who knows what card he'll play. Let's not give him a chance to do more damage. Agreed, Saria said, but how do we bring him in without setting off alarm bells? Vexley leaned back in her chair, a plan forming. We invite him to help us with a critical repair. Something that requires all hands on deck. Involving a potentially explosive component, of course, Rin suggested, his grin wicked. Of course, Vexley agreed, cracking a smile. Let's see how he reacts when he thinks the shuttle's about to fall apart. With their plan in place, Vexley had Jax send a message to Arlo, summoning him for an urgent repair session. The minutes stretched into an eternity before the auxiliary engineer rapped nervously on the bulkhead. Come in, Arlo, Vexley called, keeping her voice neutral. We've got a problem that needs your expertise. Arlo shuffled in, eyes flicking between the faces of the team members like a skittish rabbit. What's the issue? We've got a suspected malfunction in our propulsion system, Saria said, gesturing to a panel that was already open. wires spilling out like guts from a mechanical carcass. Need an extra set of hands. Sure, Arlo said, his voice a bit too eager. What do you need me to do? Vexley exchanged a glance with Rin and Saria before answering. We need you to monitor the system while I do some manual adjustments. Make sure nothing goes haywire. Got it, Arlo replied, stepping up to the console. The moment his back was turned, Vexley gave a nod. Rin and Saria moved swiftly, one sliding the door closed while the other engaged the manual lock. Arlo's head snapped up at the sound, his eyes wide with sudden understanding. What's going on? He stammered, an edge of panic in his voice. Just a little lockdown, Arlo, Vexley said, crossing her arms. Got a few questions about some late-night activities of yours. I don't know what you're talking about, Arlo said, his hands twitching nervously. Cut the crap, Rin said, stepping forward, his voice low and threatening. We know you accessed the system during Jax's shift. Care to explain why? Arlo swallowed, his eyes darting to each member of the team as if searching for a sympathetic face. I was just checking the power distribution. Routine stuff. Routine? Saria scoffed. Even I don't poke around in the mainframe at 3 in the morning. And I'd trust myself with it. Look, I didn't mean any harm, Arlo said, his voice pleading. I was just curious. Curious about what? Vexley demanded, her patience wearing thin. Arlo hesitated, then seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping. All right, I was looking for a way to adjust the system. Make some improvements. Improvements? Jax echoed, incredulous. And you thought doing that behind our backs was a good idea? I knew you wouldn't approve. Arlo insisted, his voice rising. But the Xyler tech, it's fascinating. I thought if I could integrate some of their advancements, we'd have an edge. Or you'd blow us all to kingdom come, Rin said dryly. Did you ever think of that? I was careful, Arlo protested. I swear, I didn't mean for anything bad to happen. I just wanted to help. Vexley sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You really thought playing mad scientist on our systems was the way to go? I thought I could make things better, Arlo said, sounding defeated. Better? Saria repeated, her voice hard. Or just more complicated? Look, I know it was stupid, Arlo admitted, his tone shifting to one of desperation. But if you just let me explain. Explain what? Vexley interrupted. How you nearly got us all killed. I wasn't trying to sabotage anything, Arlo pleaded. I got carried away. Please, just give me a chance to prove I can fix it. Vexley exchanged glances with her team, weighing the options. They could lock him up, cut him off from any systems, or, well, they could try a more unconventional approach. Fine, she said finally, her voice heavy with reluctance. You want a chance to prove yourself? Here it is, but you screw up once, and I'll personally eject you into space. With no suit, Arlo nodded vigorously, relief flooding his features. I won't let you down, I promise. Yeah, well, let's hope you're right, Rin said, his tone skeptical. Otherwise, you're going to be the first human popsicle in orbit. Back to work, Vexley ordered, signaling the end of their little confrontation. We've still got a job to do. The team dispersed, each returning to their tasks with an added layer of wariness. Arlo, under the watchful eyes of his crewmates, set to work with a determination that bordered on frantic. The clock continued its relentless countdown, each tick a reminder that their window was closing. The Xyler were out there, lurking, and they still had a plan to thwart. Vexley turned her attention back to the console, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. They were up against the universe's worst, but they weren't beaten yet. As she worked, a grim smile tugged at her lips. Humans were stubborn, after all, and sometimes, sheer bloody-mindedness was all it took to turn the tide. The shuttle shuddered violently, metal groaning under stress, rattling like a coffee pot on steroids. Vexley clung to the console as the alarms screamed their melodic warnings, a cacophony of disaster in B-flat major. God, she hated that sound. It was almost as annoying as Jax's snoring. This is not what I meant by shake things up, Rin quipped, teeth gritted as he tried to maintain a grip on his seat. His face was pale, a stark contrast to the dark, swirling void outside. But his humor was intact, a small miracle in itself. Someone's been tampering with the gravity settings, Saria muttered, fighting with the holographic display that flickered like a disco ball on its last dance. Yeah, well, I think someone just invited the Xyler to a housewarming party, Jax shouted over the din, his eyes fixed on the external sensors. And surprise, they're here early. The Xyler had started their preliminary attack, and subtlety was not part of their playbook. Red warning lights flashed like a diabolical Christmas tree, a festive reminder that everything was going to hell in a handbasket. Looks like they brought the whole family, Vexley said, her voice thick with sarcasm as she scanned the incoming data. And they didn't even RSVP. A massive impact shook the shuttle again, and a panel exploded in a shower of sparks, adding a lovely sprinkle of chaos to the already scenic panic. Arlo yelped, ducking instinctively. Watch out, it's raining circuitry, Rin said dryly, batting away a stray spark. Hope you brought your umbrella. Systems are down all over the place, Saria reported, hands flying over the console. This is bad, Vex. Really bad. Vexley didn't need the reminder. She could practically feel the Xyler pressing in from all sides, their presence as palpable as the stench of burned electronics. The shuttle was their only shield, and it was crumbling under the relentless assault. All right, everybody, focus, she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. We need to keep this bucket flying long enough to make a run for it. Run where, exactly? Jax's voice was brittle, laced with a gallows humor that matched the situation. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but we're kind of running out of places to go. Space is big, Vexley replied, only half joking. We'll find a corner somewhere. Maybe under a rock. Another shudder ran through the shuttle, a not-so-friendly reminder that time was not on their side. Vexley punched a few buttons, attempting to divert power to the shields, but the controls were as responsive as a dead slug. Vex, we've got a breach on Deck 3, Saria called out, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. Pressure's dropping. Seal it off, Vexley ordered, her mind racing through the possibilities. We can't afford to lose any more oxygen. Already on it, Saria replied, her voice tight with concentration. Meanwhile, Rin said, his tone deceptively casual, our friends outside are having a field day with our hull. If they poke any more holes, this shuttle's going to look like a giant chunk of Swiss cheese. Delicious, Jax added with a sardonic grin. Because what's a space adventure without some culinary metaphors? Enough with the cheese, Jax, Vexley snapped, though her lips twitched in reluctant amusement. Focus on getting us out of this mess. Right, no more cheesy puns, Jax conceded, turning back to his panel. Though if we do survive, I'm demanding a gourmet meal. With actual cheese. Vexley rolled her eyes, trying to suppress a smile that was wildly inappropriate given the circumstances. But gallows humor was all they had left, a defiant flicker of humanity in the face of oblivion. Rin, can you get us some breathing room? She asked, her focus shifting to the immediate problem, namely, not dying. Working on it, Rin replied, though the confidence in his voice was strained. If I can just reroute power from the auxiliary systems. Which auxiliary systems? Saria inquired, skeptical. We're barely keeping the life support running as it is. Rin's fingers danced over the controls, a rapid-fire ballet of desperation. The coffee maker, he deadpanned. Time to make the ultimate sacrifice. Not the coffee maker, Jax gasped, feigning horror. Have you no mercy? Sorry, buddy, Rin said with a grim smile. Desperate times call for caffeine-free measures. It was a testament to their collective insanity that they could joke about such things while the universe was falling apart around them. But maybe that was what kept them sane, if only for a little while longer. The shuttle jerked again, and Vexley's heart skipped a beat as the lights flickered ominously. That was close, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Define close, Saria said, her face tight with focused intensity as she monitored the systems. Close enough that I nearly lost my lunch, Vexley replied, trying to keep her voice light. And I haven't even eaten today. Good thing, Rin remarked. Space food doesn't taste any better coming back up. Noted, Vexley said dryly, though there was little warmth in her tone now. The reality of their situation was pressing in, stifling the humor even as they clung to it. All right, I've got a plan, she announced, surprising herself with the sudden clarity of thought. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Risky? That's my favorite kind of plan, Rin said with a smirk. Lay it on us. We divert all remaining power to the engines for a brief burst, Vexley explained, her mind racing. It'll fry a few systems, but it might just give us enough speed to get out of the Xyler's range. And into whose range? Saria asked, skeptical as ever. Because last I checked, space is pretty vast and full of things that want to kill us. I'll worry about that when we get there, Vexley replied, her voice laced with a grim certainty. Right now, we need to live long enough to make it a problem. Sounds like a plan, Jax chimed in, his grin a little less forced now. And if it doesn't work, well, we won't be around to complain. Exactly, Vexley said, trying to muster a smile. So let's make it count. The team sprang into action, each member focused on their task. It was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to outrun their enemies. And yet, as they worked, a strange calm settled over Vexley. It was as if the chaos around her had sharpened her focus, crystallizing her thoughts. Here goes nothing, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The engines roared to life, a deafening blast that reverberated through the shuttle. Vexley felt the acceleration as a physical force, pressing her back into her seat. The Xyler ships dwindled on the sensors, their dark shapes receding into the abyss. Looks like we made it, Rin said, his voice tinged with disbelief. For now, Vexley replied, unwilling to celebrate just yet. Keep an eye on those sensors. We need to know the moment they change course. Roger that, Rin said, his fingers already dancing over the controls. The shuttle hurtled onward, a fragile lifeboat in a sea of stars. Vexley let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her muscles relaxing fractionally. Nice flying, Saria commented, her voice warmer than usual. For a second there, I thought we were goners. Still might be, Vexley cautioned, though there was a spark of hope in her eyes now. But at least we bought ourselves some time. Time to figure out our next move, Jax said, his tone serious despite the joke. So what's the plan, boss? Vexley hesitated, weighing their options. The Xyler were relentless, and their resources were dwindling. But they weren't beaten yet. We regroup, she decided, her voice firm. Assess the damage, make repairs. And then, we figure out how to hit back. Sounds good to me, Rin said, settling back into his seat, a trace of a grin on his lips. After all, what's a little cosmic horror between friends? They laughed, a shared moment of defiance in the face of despair. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sustain them, at least for now. And in the end, maybe that was all they needed. A little laughter, a little hope, and a whole lot of stubbornness. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against the odds, clawing their way back from the brink with a smile and a snarky comment. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to see them through. With the Xyler temporarily at bay, they set to work, patching up the shuttle, nursing their wounds, and clinging to the fragile thread of hope that had kept them alive so far. And as the stars stretched out before them, endless and indifferent, Vexley allowed herself a moment to breathe, to dream. Because in the bleak expanse of space, dreams were all they had left. And sometimes, that was enough. The shuttle limped along like an asthmatic donkey, its engines sputtering and groaning under the strain. But somehow, it held together, a testament to human ingenuity, or sheer stubbornness, that it hadn't yet disintegrated into a cloud of space debris. Vexley, perched rigidly at the console, peered intently at the flickering holographic display. Despite the chaos, a sliver of hope had wormed its way into her thoughts, and it was time to do something about it. Listen up, folks, she announced, trying to sound more confident than she felt. We've got a situation, and no, I'm not talking about the fact that I haven't showered in 3 days. Speak for yourself, Rin quipped, sniffing the air dramatically. I thought that was just the smell of desperation. Or charred circuits, Saria added, her face lit by the holographic display as she fiddled with alien tech like it was a particularly tricky puzzle. But you said, situation, like it was news. Enlighten us. Vexley tapped a finger against the console, the sound a staccato rhythm in the tense quiet. It's about the Xyler. I think I might have found a flaw in their genetic engineering. Hang on, Jax interrupted, leaning forward with renewed interest. You mean those DNA-twisting aliens with the God complex? They screwed up? Seems so, Vexley said, a hint of a wicked grin playing on her lips. Their DNA manipulation isn't as perfect as they think. They've got a weakness. Rin snorted, crossing his arms. Classic. Even the universe's biggest ego can't account for a slip-up. Is it something we can use? Possibly, Vexley replied, her mind racing with possibilities. But we need to act fast. The countdown's ticking, and those bugs won't wait around for us to figure it out. All right, Doc, lay it on us, Arlo piped up, rubbing at a smudge of dirt on his cheek that he hadn't noticed until now. What's their Achilles heel? And more importantly, how do we kick it? Vexley leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, even though the only ones around to hear were her trusty crew. Their DNA alterations make them susceptible to a specific frequency of radiation. We might be able to exploit that, disrupt their signal, maybe even turn it against them. Radiation, huh? Rin mused, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Sounds dangerous. Probably because it is, Saria cut in, skeptical as always. Tinkering with frequencies and radiation is about as safe as juggling plasma grenades. Good thing we're not known for playing it safe, Jax said, his grin returning full force. How do we get this magical frequency? Vexley pulled up a schematic on the display, pointing to a series of numbers that meant little to anyone but her. We tweak our sensors, assuming they're not completely fried, and beam it out. With any luck, it'll throw the Xyler into disarray. Or piss them off even more, Arlo commented, ever the realist. Which could make for a hell of a show. Rin cracked his knuckles, a gesture as much for show as substance. I say we go for it. If we're doomed, might as well go down swinging. Exactly, Vexley agreed, her determination hardening like steel. And if it works, we give those scaly bastards a taste of their own medicine. Then let's ride this wild ride, Saria said, offering a rare smile. It was a fierce thing, more promise than reassurance, but it was contagious. The crew sprang into action, each member focused and intent. The shuttle's interior was a hive of activity, the air buzzing with urgency and the faint clang of tools on metal. It was a symphony of chaos, but it was their chaos, and they thrived in it. Jax, you're on comms, Vexley ordered, her mind already plotting the next steps. Rin, Arlo, get those sensors recalibrated. Saria, help me with the frequency modulation. As they worked, the ship groaned and shuddered, a protest against their madcap plans. But Vexley ignored it, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. The Xyler's flaw was a slender thread to grasp onto, but it was a thread nonetheless. Almost got it, Saria murmured, her fingers flying over the controls. Just need to boost the output without blowing us to kingdom come. No pressure, right? Rin said, fiddling with a bundle of wires that looked suspiciously like a bird's nest. Just a little life or death tinkering. Nothing we haven't done before. Exactly, Vexley replied, her voice tight with concentration. And if we make it through this, I'm giving everyone a raise. You're assuming we survive, Arlo pointed out dryly. Optimism is a survival trait, Vexley shot back, not bothering to hide the edge of grim humor in her words. Now let's focus. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity as they inched closer to their goal. Vexley could feel the tension coiling in her gut, a winding spring that threatened to snap at any moment. But beneath it, there was something else, a spark of hope, fragile yet fierce, urging her onward. Frequencies set, Saria announced, her voice cutting through the tension. Ready when you are, Vex. Vexley nodded, her heart thudding in her chest like a war drum. All right, folks, this is it. Let's make some noise. With a deep breath, she activated the system, sending the modified frequency out into the void. It was a gamble, a desperate play in a game stacked against them, but it was theirs to make. Silence descended, thick and oppressive, as they waited for a response. The sensors blinked and flickered, feeding back data that was both a comfort and a torment. And then, like a thunderclap in the stillness, the Xyler ships began to react. They're scattering, Jax exclaimed, disbelief and triumph warring in his voice. It's working. Of course it is, Rin said, a grin splitting his face. You doubted Vex and her merry band of misfits? No one doubts Vex, Arlo said, his tone mock serious. At least, not if they want to keep breathing. As the Xyler ships careened away, their neat formations crumbling into chaos, Vexley allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. It was a minor victory, but victories had been thin on the ground lately, and she'd take what she could get. Nice going, team, she said, her voice rich with gratitude and determination. But we're not out of the woods yet. Wouldn't be fun if we were, Rin said, leaning back in his seat with a satisfied sigh. What's next on the agenda, boss? We need to regroup, Vexley replied, her mind already spinning with plans. Make repairs, gather intel, and figure out what our next move is. Sounds like a plan, Jax said, his expression fierce with unspoken promises. And if the Xyler come back, we'll be ready. Ready and armed with our secret weapon, Saria added, the gleam in her eyes a promise of its own. And if all else fails, Arlo interjected, there's always the old-fashioned way. Vexley raised an eyebrow. What's the old-fashioned way? Arlo shrugged, a lopsided grin lighting his face. Kick 'em in the metaphorical nuts until they beg for mercy. Effective, Rin agreed, nodding sagely. Crude, but effective. They laughed, the sound a balm to their frayed nerves. The universe might be vast and uncaring, full of threats and challenges that would eat them alive if given half a chance, but they were still here, still fighting. And as long as they had each other, they had a chance. All right, team, Vexley said, her voice carrying the confidence of hard-won experience. Let's get to work. We've got a battle to win. With renewed purpose, they turned back to their tasks, the flickering lights of the holographic display casting shadows that danced like specters on the walls. The fight was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next, armed with a newfound advantage and a resolve that burned as brightly as the stars. Because in the end, it wasn't just about survival, it was about pushing back against the darkness, laughing in the face of the abyss, and proving that even in the bleakest of times, hope could still find a way to shine. And as the shuttle coursed through the void, leaving the chaos of battle behind, Vexley knew that they were on the cusp of something great. The Xyler might have underestimated humanity once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Not if she had anything to say about it. With her crew by her side and their path uncertain but full of possibilities, Vexley felt a sense of determination settle over her, as comforting as it was invigorating. The universe might be a harsh place, but they were ready to fight for their place in it. And fight they would, until the very last breath. The air inside the shuttle was thick with the unique aroma of stress, fear, and that indefinable tang that came from long, cramped hours in a metal can hurtling through the void. Vexley couldn't help but think they could bottle it and sell it as ode to desperation. It might be a hit with the existentially inclined. So, what's the plan now, fearless leader? Rin asked, reclining in his chair with the reckless abandon of someone who'd come to terms with the fact that comfort was a distant dream. Or do we just sit here and enjoy the view while the Xyler figure out they've been had? Kind of a shame we can't just sit back and enjoy the intergalactic fireworks, Jax chimed in, his eyes glued to the flickering holographic display. But something tells me they're not gonna take this lying down. Brilliant deduction, Jax, Saria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she double-checked the frequency modulation. What would we ever do without your keen insights? Probably die horribly, Arlo suggested, rubbing at the smudge on his cheek that had somehow spread rather than disappeared. But hey, at least we'd do it quietly. Vexley shook her head, trying to focus on the task at hand. We've thrown a wrench in their plans, but we need to keep the pressure on. The Xyler are predictable in their unpredictability. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Another day, another dose of imminent death, Rin sighed, leaning over to inspect the recalibrated sensors. These babies ready to give our scaly friends another headache? Almost, Saria replied, fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist playing a particularly discordant concerto. Just need to make sure they don't explode in our faces first. Always a useful feature, Rin noted dryly. All right, folks, Vexley interjected, sweeping a hand through her hair, which had long since given up trying to look respectable. Let's keep the momentum going. Jax, keep monitoring their movements. Arlo, go help Saria with the sensors. Rin, you're with me. Let's make sure our defenses are up to snuff. Defenses? Arlo asked, raising an eyebrow. You mean the equivalent of a "please don't hurt us" sign, right? Pretty much, Vexley replied, her tone as dry as the vacuum outside. But with a bit more bite. The shuttle shuddered as though it had opinions about their likelihood of success. Vexley ignored it, choosing instead to focus on the fact that they were, at the very least, still in one piece. One piece and still breathing, a minor miracle in their line of work. Think we can really pull this off? Rin asked, his voice low enough that only Vexley could hear it over the soft hum of machinery. Do we have a choice? Vexley shot back, her eyes never leaving the console as she ran through the diagnostics. It's either this or let the Xyler have their way with the universe. And I'd rather not see what that looks like. Fair enough, Rin said, a crooked grin tugging at his lips. Guess I've always wanted to be a hero. Well, now's your chance, Vexley replied, unable to keep the wry humor out of her voice even as she felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper on her shoulders. Just try not to let it go to your head. The comms crackled to life, Jax's voice distorted but unmistakable. Vex, they're regrouping. Looks like we might have pissed them off. Amazing how that seems to be our specialty, Arlo commented, his words punctuated by the faint clatter of tools. What's the plan when they come back swinging? We give them a bloody nose and send them packing, Vexley replied, her fingers tapping a rapid rhythm on the console as she checked their weapon systems. We've got them on the back foot, let's keep them there. Straightforward, Saria said, a hint of approval in her voice. Hope those Xyler bastards like surprises. Surprises are our specialty, Rin said, swagger creeping into his voice. Just ask my ex. Your ex might have something to say about your definition of surprise, Rin, Jax pointed out, his voice smooth like the slickest used starship salesman. But let's focus on ruining someone else's day for once. The Xyler ships were coming back into view, their formation tighter, more aggressive. They were like a school of sharks that had caught the scent of blood, and the crew of the shuttle was the prey. But this prey had teeth too, and Vexley intended to show just how sharp they could be. All systems are green, Saria confirmed, her voice a cool anchor amidst the rising tension. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Then let's give them something to think about, Vexley said, her voice steady even as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The shuttle surged forward, a bull charging at a matador, engines roaring to life with a defiant growl. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered, but there was a certain freedom in having nothing left to lose. It made every decision simpler, every choice clearer. As the Xyler ships closed in, Vexley activated the modified frequency, sending out a pulse that rippled through the void like a pebble dropped in a pond. The reaction was almost immediate, chaos erupting in the enemy ranks as their systems scrambled to cope with the unexpected interference. Looks like they're having a bad day, Jax commented, a note of satisfaction in his voice as the Xyler ships struggled to maintain their formation. Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch, Rin said, his grin wide and wolfish. Ready to make it worse for them? Is that even a question? Arlo asked, his tone as dry as a Martian summer. The battle was a whirlwind of motion and noise, laser fire streaking across the void, ships darting and weaving like boxers in a ring. Vexley kept her focus sharp, directing her crew with a precision born of necessity. Every choice mattered, and there was no room for error. Think they're getting the message? Saria asked, her gaze never leaving the controls as she adjusted their shields. They'd better, Vexley replied, her voice hard as steel. Otherwise, we'll just have to send it louder. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Doc, Rin said, even as he fired another volley at the enemy. I like my chances of survival when they're higher than zero. Don't worry, Rin, Vexley replied, her smile hidden beneath a mask of concentration. You're safe unless you start siding with the Xyler. The tide of battle was turning, slowly, inexorably, but turning nonetheless. The Xyler, for all their power and arrogance, were facing something they hadn't anticipated. A crew of stubborn, reckless humans who refused to back down. Looks like we're actually doing it, Jax said, disbelief coloring his voice just a shade. They're pulling back. Good riddance, Arlo said, taking a moment to savor the sight of the Xyler ships retreating in disarray. Let's hope they think twice before they try this crap again. Or at least give us a little time to catch our breath, Saria added, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. Vexley allowed herself a moment to bask in the victory, a small, hard-won triumph that was sweeter for its improbability. They had defied the odds and emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken. Nice work, team, she said, her voice carrying the warmth of genuine gratitude. But let's not get too comfortable. We've still got work to do. Wouldn't have it any other way, Rin said, his voice equal parts exhaustion and exhilaration as he slumped back in his seat. Guess this means the drinks are on you, Vex. Vexley chuckled, the sound lighter than air. If we make it through this whole mess, I'll buy everyone the fanciest synthal credits can buy. That's a promise I'll hold you to, Saria said, her smile small but genuine. As the shuttle coasted away from the battlefield, the crew settled into a weary but satisfied silence. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger for it, united in purpose and forged in the fires of adversity. The universe, in all its indifference, had thrown its worst at them, and they had thrown it right back, with interest. It was a victory worth savoring, however brief the respite might be. Vexley leaned back, letting the tension drain from her muscles as she considered the road ahead. The Xyler might have been beaten back for now, but they wouldn't stay down for long. There were still challenges to face, dangers to navigate, and a galaxy to protect from those who would see it torn apart. But for now, they were alive, and that was enough. More than enough, given the alternative. "All right, crew," she said, her voice a blend of exhaustion and determination. "Let's get back to base and start prepping for the next round. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." And as the shuttle turned towards the distant stars, its engines humming with renewed purpose, Vexley allowed herself a rare moment of optimism. Because in the unending void, amidst the chaos and uncertainty, they had found something worth fighting for, and they weren't about to give it up without a fight. Not now, not ever. The lab was eerily quiet, save for the occasional beep of a machine or the distant hum of the ventilation system struggling to pump recycled air through the cramped metal box they called home. If air could groan, theirs certainly would be by now. The crew had returned to base, battered but victorious, each one wearing that special combination of exhaustion and triumph like a badge of honor. Dr. Vexley leaned against a console, arms crossed, eyes scanning her team. "First off, I'd like to say, you're all idiots." Rin, sprawled across a chair like it was his personal lounge, raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that a given at this point?" "Maybe, but today you're my idiots," Vexley continued, a faint, tired smile breaking through her usually stern facade. "We made it through round one. Let's not screw up the encore." "Encore?" Saria chimed in, her fingers still tapping incessantly at the controls like a pianist who didn't know when to quit. "Just when I thought this circus was over." "Oh, it's not over," Arlo interjected, wiping an oily smudge off his forehead. "This is just the intermission. Next up, a thrilling performance of How the Hell Do We Survive Again? Think we can sell tickets?" Jax quipped from his usual perch by the holographic display, which now showed a less terrifying version of the space sector outside. "Could use the funds for some real coffee." "Priorities, Jax. Always first with the important stuff," Rin chuckled, tilting his head back with a sigh that spoke volumes about how much he'd rather be anywhere else, preferably somewhere involving a beach and a drink that came with a little umbrella. Vexley let them banter, the familiar rhythm of sarcasm and gallows humor a balm for her frayed nerves. These moments, as absurd as they were, reminded her why they kept fighting. The odds were never in their favor, but who needed odds when you had stubbornness and a healthy disregard for your own mortality? "All right, enough with the chit-chat. We've got work to do if we don't want to end up Xyler Chow," she announced, pushing off the console to pace the room. "Besides, I have a feeling they're not going to take that little stunt we pulled too well," she added, scanning their faces for any hint of doubt. "They never do," Saria replied, her voice filled with a kind of weary confidence. "But we've got something they'll never have." "Oh, do tell," Arlo said, leaning against a bulkhead with an exaggerated expression of interest. "Human resilience," Saria said, her sarcasm dropping for a moment of genuine sincerity that was as rare as it was surprising. "Resilience, huh?" Rin mused, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "I thought all we had was a talent for making really poor life choices." "Two sides of the same coin," Jax pointed out, tweaking a control that sent a hologram of a Xyler ship spinning lazily in the air. "We just make those choices with a bit more flair." Vexley chuckled, shaking her head. "Whatever it is, keep doing it. Because we've got 72 hours before the Xyler come knocking again, and I'd rather not be here to welcome them with open arms." "Or open airlocks," Arlo suggested, a wicked grin on his face. "That usually sends a pretty clear message." "Right, let's focus on making sure they get the message before they reach our doorstep." As the crew set about their tasks, the lab buzzed with a renewed energy. It was a fragile sort of hope, the kind that teetered on the edge of a precipice, but hope nonetheless. The kind of hope that was just audacious enough to spit in the face of cosmic indifference and demand a better outcome. Saria and Arlo huddled over a console, their heads bent together in intense discussion. Think we could rig these Xylar circuits to give us an edge? Saria asked, her voice low but urgent. Depends on your definition of edge, Arlo replied, squinting at the data streaming across the screen. Could give us a fighting chance, or it could blow up in our faces. 50-50. 50-50? Those are better odds than usual, Saria said, her smile a thin line of determination. Don't let it go to your head, Arlo warned. We're still dealing with tech that's about as stable as Rin's love life. Hey, Rin protested from across the room, though he couldn't quite hide his grin. I resemble that remark. Meanwhile, Jax and Rin were busy recalibrating the sensors yet again, making sure the false trail they'd created wouldn't lead the Xylar back to their doorstep prematurely. Think they'll buy it? Jax asked, adjusting a knob with precision. Xylar aren't exactly known for their subtlety, Rin replied, peering over Jax's shoulder. But let's hope they're dumb enough to fall for it. Could be fun. Define fun, Jax said, one eyebrow raised. Watching them chase their tails while we figure out how to kick their scaly butts, Rin said, his grin sharp and feral. Sounds like a plan, Jax agreed, standing back to admire their handiwork. Now let's hope the universe is feeling generous. Vexley continued to move about the lab, checking in on each of her crew, her presence a steadying force. For all her cynicism and sharp words, they knew she cared. Cared enough to keep them alive, to push them when the odds seemed impossible, to keep them fighting when surrender felt like a blessed relief. She paused by the viewport, looking out at the distant stars with a contemplative frown. This base might not be much, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else, but it's home. Or the closest thing we've got to it out here. Rin joined her, following her gaze into the void. Funny how a metal box in the middle of nowhere becomes home when you've got nowhere else to go. It's not the place, Vexley said, her tone softening. It's the people. The fact that we're still here, still fighting. Rin nodded, the usual humor in his eyes giving way to something deeper. You think we'll make it? We've made it this far, Vexley replied, her voice steady and sure. And if there's one thing humanity's good at, it's surviving. Surviving, yeah, but thriving? Rin asked, his voice tinged with doubt. One step at a time, Vexley said, her lips quirking into a faint smile. We'll get there. Might take a few more punches to the gut, but we'll get there. They stood in silence for a moment, united in their shared defiance against a universe that seemed hell-bent on testing them at every turn. Around them, the lab hummed with the quiet activity of a crew that had fought and won, if only for a moment. As the hours ticked by, each member of the crew found themselves drifting back to their makeshift quarters for some much-needed rest. Jax was the last to leave the lab, his hands lingering over the controls as if he could somehow will them to work faster, more efficiently. Vexley watched him, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. This was her crew, ragtag, irreverent, impossibly stubborn. And if anyone could find a way out of this mess, it was them. Get some rest, Jax, she called softly. We'll need your brain working overtime tomorrow. Jax turned, a wry smile on his face. You mean it's not always working overtime? Point taken, Vexley conceded with a chuckle. But humor me. All right, Jax relented, heading for the door. Just make sure you do the same. You're not invincible, you know. Don't I know it? Vexley murmured to the empty lab as Jax disappeared down the corridor. With the quiet settling in around her, Vexley allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. They'd faced impossible odds and emerged with a victory, however temporary. And while the threat of the Xylar loomed large over their heads, the fight wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. She allowed herself a moment to picture a future beyond the next battle. A future where they weren't constantly one step away from obliteration. It felt as distant as the stars, but not entirely out of reach. Not if they kept fighting. As she turned to leave the lab, the soft glow of the consoles casting long shadows across the floor, Vexley made a silent vow. To protect this fragile sanctuary they'd carved out in the void, to keep her crew alive against all odds, and to never, ever give up. Because if there was one thing the Xylar and the universe at large had underestimated, it was the human spirit. The relentless, defiant, audacious spirit that refused to go quietly into the night. With a determined glint in her eye, Vexley headed for her quarters, ready for whatever came next. Because no matter how many battles lay ahead, they would face them together. And they would win.